Popular auction show Storage Wars is under fire from an ex-star who says they are faking some of the big money shots. And ABC's Dan Harris separates fact from fiction.
Bring it on. 250. Sold.
Storage Wars ran for over a decade, made ordinary people into television personalities, and then the cameras stopped. What happened after is something the production company never planned for, and most fans never saw coming. One cast member was 2 days from dying and had no idea his heart was failing. Another woke up unable to breathe and survived a stroke that kills most people who have one. One went to jail, came back, and then died alone in a parking lot. And the person connected to this franchise, who is actually behind bars in 2026, was never even on the show. This is what became of the people Storage Wars made famous, and it is considerably darker than anything that aired. The cast member who nearly died twice before anyone noticed. Most people who watched Storage Wars remember Daryl Sheets as the big personality, the loud bidder, the one who showed up with his son Brandon and treated every auction like a competition he intended to win. What almost nobody knew, because Daryl never made it public until he had to, was that his body had been shutting down for months before anyone caught it. In March 2019, Daryl was at a Justin Timberlake concert when the symptoms finally became impossible to ignore. He had been feeling unwell for a while, but had not acted on it, which is the kind of detail that lands differently once you know what was actually happening inside him. At the hospital, doctors found his left anterior descending artery was 95% blocked. They also discovered a lung infection and confirmed he was diabetic, none of which he had known. Surgeons placed 2 stents and treated him for congestive heart failure. The blockage he had been walking around with is the one cardiologists refer to as the widowmaker, because most people who have it never make it to a hospital. Daryl had been 1 or 2 days from dying. He then found out he had suffered 2 separate heart attacks, not one, back to back, without recognizing either of them for what they were. What makes this story even harder to sit with is what Daryl had already been carrying for over 30 years before any of this happened. In 1988, long before Storage Wars existed, and before any camera crew knew his name, he opened a storage unit in San Diego and found a body inside. He has spoken about it only when pressed, describing it as something he preferred not to revisit. What investigators told him was that the body was a woman killed by her husband, and that the unit was connected to an active occult investigation. Detectives seized everything inside, including items Daryl had already begun sorting through. He was not compensated for the unit. He walked away with nothing but the memory, and he carried it for more than 20 years before the show ever made him famous. The auctioneer who survived on a 20% chance. Dan Dodson was the voice of Storage Wars, not a buyer, not a personality built around bidding wars and catchphrases, but the fast-talking auctioneer whose delivery controlled the pace of every single scene the show filmed. He and his wife Laura had built American auctioneers together long before a television crew ever showed up, and his voice was the engine that made the format work. Without Dan Dodson, there is no auction. Without the auction, there is no show. In June 2014, that voice almost went silent permanently. The night before it happened, Laura noticed something was wrong. Dan was saying things in bed that made no sense, asking questions that had no context, responding to conversations that were not happening. The next morning, he got out of the shower and collapsed. Laura called emergency services. While they waited, she and their son performed resuscitation on the floor as Dan lost color beneath them. At the hospital, doctors found 2 brain aneurysms that had caused a subarachnoid hemorrhage. His odds of surviving surgery were 20%. He came through it. His neurologist attributed the outcome largely to the absence of severe internal bleeding, which is the factor that kills most people in his situation before they reach an operating table. From his hospital bed that same week, Dan told Laura he was done smoking. He went back to auctioneering after his recovery, returning to the auction floor with the same pace and volume that had defined his work for decades. What makes this segment connect directly to the next one is that Dan's survival set up the conditions for something that happened to his son 6 years later. Something that required a doctor to physically hold a human being together from one city to another, just to keep him alive long enough to reach surgery. Dan survived because his wife noticed something was wrong the night before. His son Garrett survived because a doctor on an airlift flight refused to let go of a wound for the entire duration of the journey. The doctor who held a wound together mid-flight. Garrett Dodson was 22 years old in 2020 when a man named Garrett Wilder stopped his car, started shouting, and then shot him in the torso when Garrett approached the vehicle. The bullet ruptured his vena cava, one of the largest veins in the body, and he was bleeding internally within minutes of being hit. Garrett called emergency services himself. He was airlifted to a hospital in Las Vegas, and during that flight, a doctor climbed onto the gurney, positioned himself over Garrett, and pressed both hands directly into the wound for the entire duration of the journey. That doctor held that position from Lake Havasu City to Las Vegas without releasing pressure, because releasing pressure would have meant Garrett bled out before landing. He survived surgery. The bullet remained lodged in his L3 vertebra. He wore a back brace for 8 weeks and described the financial aftermath as something that took years to work through. The airlift alone, combined with emergency surgery and extended recovery, generated a level of medical debt that he said nobody at 22 is prepared for. He spoke about it publicly because he wanted people to understand that surviving the shooting was only the beginning of what the event cost him. His parents carried him through both the physical recovery and the financial weight of it. Garrett Wilder was arrested, prosecuted, and convicted of drive-by shooting. He is currently serving 10.5 years. He is the only person connected to the Storage Wars franchise who is confirmed to be behind bars in 2026, and he was never on the show. He shot the son of the man whose voice the show ran on, and he is the closest this story gets to a direct answer for the jail portion of the title. The cast member who actually went to jail is a different story entirely, one that involves a federal weapons violation, a substance arrest, and an ending that nobody who watched him on television would have predicted. The one who went to jail and never recovered from what came after. Mark Balelo arrived on Storage Wars in Season 2 with a nickname, a bidding style that made him impossible to ignore, and the kind of on-screen energy that production teams spend years trying to manufacture in cast members who simply do not have it naturally. Brandy Passante called him Rico Suave on camera, and the name fit. He spent freely, moved fast, and carried himself like someone who expected to be around for a long time. Before the show, Balelo had already built a criminal record. A substance conviction in 2009 put him on probation. While on probation, he transported a firearm across state lines, a federal violation regardless of circumstance. He said he had found the weapon inside a storage unit he had purchased, which may or may not have been true, but did not change the legal reality of what he had done. A judge sentenced him to 45 days in jail. He served them and returned to the show. What is worth noting about that return is how seamlessly it happened. The show did not treat his absence as something requiring explanation or acknowledgement. He came back, the cameras rolled, and the auction format absorbed him again, as though the intervening weeks had not contained a jail sentence. That particular quality of reality television, its ability to continue without accounting for what happens in the gaps, is part of what makes Balelo's full story so difficult to reconcile with the version audiences were watching. The show presented him as a colorful, fast-moving buyer with good instincts. The life running parallel to that presentation was considerably more complicated. In February 2013, he was arrested on a substance possession charge and released. The arrest appeared to hit him differently than the previous legal troubles had. He told his fiancée, Elizabeth, that he was feeling mentally unstable and asked her to stay with him at his office. She stayed until things seemed to settle and then left. The next morning, Balelo was found dead inside his vehicle from carbon monoxide poisoning. His death was ruled self-inflicted. He left behind Elizabeth, young children, and a community that had raised money for autism causes in his name. The person who had arrived on Storage Wars with the most visible energy and the most immediately magnetic presence was also the one whose life outside the cameras was under the most pressure, and the show's audience had seen almost none of it. Balelo's story sits at the heaviest end of this list, but it is not the only one involving legal consequences for someone connected to the show. The next name involves a domestic violence charge. A cast member who was quietly removed from a season while the investigation ran, and a situation that, as of 2026, has never been fully resolved in any public courtroom. The charge that ended a partnership and stayed open for years. Garrett Schultz and Brandy were together from the first season of Storage Wars. Their dynamic was one of the show's most consistent draws across more than a decade of episodes. They had a spin-off. They had children together. They were never married. By 2020, they had quietly separated, though the split was not announced publicly until the season 13 premiere in 2021. On April 30th of that year, Schultz and Passante crossed paths at a bar in Orange County, California. According to prosecutors, a verbal argument turned physical. Schultz left before police arrived, and no arrest was made that night. The Orange County District Attorney's Office later confirmed he had been charged with 1 count of misdemeanor domestic violence battery. Schultz denied that any physical contact occurred, and his attorney stated he intended to contest the charge. A&E launched an internal investigation and kept him off season 14 while it ran. Passante returned for that season without him. As of 2026, the legal proceedings remain publicly unresolved. No conviction, no dismissal, no confirmed outcome on record. She did not address the charge through any formal statement. Instead, she posted a photograph of a tattoo on her wrist, the single word "free," with a caption about leaving a situation that many people never find their way out of, and about living without the weight of fear. That caption said more than a press release would have. What the tattoo and the caption together communicated was something that a formal statement never could have. It described a specific kind of relief that only comes after a specific kind of weight has been lifted. Passante had been dealing with the consequences of public attention long before the 2021 incident. Earlier in her time on the show, she had begun receiving threatening letters at her home address. Serious enough that she relocated to a gated community, changed her daily routines, and started seeing a therapist to work through the anxiety that the show's visibility had created. She was already managing the cost of fame before the personal situation with Schultz added another layer to it. By the time she posted that photograph, she had been carrying accumulated pressure for years. Schultz has not appeared on Storage Wars since 2021. The charge remains open. The show continued. Passante continued. He did not. What the show never fully captured across all of these stories is the degree to which the people who made it famous were carrying things the format had no interest in filming. The medical emergencies, the legal consequences, the grief, the debt, the recovery. None of it made for the kind of television that Storage Wars was built to deliver. But it was happening anyway, in the spaces between auctions, in the years after the contracts ended, and in some cases, while the cameras were still rolling. The ones the show lost entirely. Not every difficult story connected to Storage Wars ends with a legal charge or a near-death experience that someone fought their way back from. Some of them end with an absence that simply does not go away. Mo Prigoff spent 45 years working as a podiatrist in North Oak Cliff in Dallas, while simultaneously running a mid-century modern furniture and antique store called River Regency. The cameras found him late, through his long friendship with Barry Weiss and his recurring appearances on Storage Wars Texas. He was remembered by people who worked on the show for his humor, his genuine enthusiasm for unusual pieces, and the ease he brought to every auction he participated in. He never courted conflict. He showed up, bid on things he genuinely valued, and treated people around him well. He passed away on March 4th, 2021, at 78, after a long illness that he had never publicized. What made Mo's passing particularly quiet in the context of this franchise was how little fanfare surrounded it. He had not been a central figure on the main show, and the Texas spin-off occupied a smaller space in the overall Storage Wars universe. But for the people who had followed that version of the show specifically, and for Barry Weiss, whose friendship with Mo had predated the cameras entirely, the loss was real and personal in a way that the general audience never fully registered. Mo had brought something to that show that was genuinely difficult to categorize. He was not performing. He was simply himself, which on a reality television set is rarer than it sounds, and the people around him noticed the difference. Gunter Nezoda came to Storage Wars viewers in 2015 as the father of cast member Renee Nezoda, and became one of the most genuinely liked people ever to appear on the show. Before arriving on American television in his 60s, he had spent decades working as a musician, photographer, and low-budget film actor in Austria. He worked session photography for touring acts, appeared in European productions, and built a career across 3 disciplines over several decades before immigrating to the United States. Even Dave Hester, who had built his entire Storage Wars identity around making things difficult for everyone around him, made an exception for Gunter, telling Renee he would not bid against his father if he wanted a locker. In September 2022, Gunter was diagnosed with lung cancer after 30 years of smoking. His lungs had deteriorated past the point where treatment could meaningfully intervene. In March 2023, he died in Salt Lake City at 67. Renee posted a video for fans that same day, speaking directly to the people who had followed his appearances, because she felt they had earned that news directly, rather than through a headline. The accident, Barry Weiss never talked about on camera. Barry Weiss left Storage Wars years before his accident, having built his own spin-off in 2014 before walking away from television entirely to return to motorcycles, rare cars, and a life that answered to nobody else's schedule. He was, by most accounts, exactly where he wanted to be. His departure from the show had been entirely on his own terms, which was consistent with how he had always operated, and the years between leaving and the accident were spent doing precisely what he had always done before the cameras arrived. In April 2019, Weiss and a friend were riding through the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles when a car pulled out of a parking lot and struck them. His friend broke his knee, elbow, and wrist. Weiss had it considerably worse. He was taken to the ICU with serious damage to his femur and back, requiring multiple surgeries. His friend posted from the scene while Weiss was still in the operating room, asking for support for someone who had serious chest and leg trauma and needed time to recover. Weiss spent weeks in the hospital and worked through an extended rehabilitation process. The injuries he sustained were serious enough that a full recovery was not a given, and the rehabilitation involved the kind of sustained, unglamorous physical work that has no place in a television format built around personality and quick transactions. He did not document the process publicly. He did not use the accident as an opportunity to re-engage with an audience. He went through it the way he had always handled things that were genuinely difficult, privately and without performance. When he returned to Storage Wars in 2021, he arrived at an auction in a 1939 Lincoln Zephyr he had sourced himself, got out of the car, and went straight back to work. That return, handled entirely on his own terms and without any public processing of what he had been through, is about as Barry Weiss as anything he ever did on the show. If the show spent over a decade filming auctions while the people in them were quietly dealing with strokes, shootings, federal charges, and grief that never made it to air, what does that say about how much reality television ever actually shows us? And of everyone on this list who survived something the cameras missed, which one do you think carried the heaviest weight in the years after the show ended? Share with us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.